Hey guys, tonight we're traveling back to ancient Persia, where the desert sun hits you like a sledgehammer wrapped in molten copper, and you're about to discover how people survived without electricity, ice makers, or even a basic desk fan. Picture yourself standing in the middle of Yazd, circa 400 BCE, where the temperature is pushing 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Your sandals are literally melting into the ground, and you're sweating so profusely that local merchants are eyeing you as a potential salt mine. Here's the thing, you probably won't survive this journey without developing a profound appreciation for your modern AC unit, but you will witness engineering marvels that would make today's HVAC technicians weep with envy. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing how our little bedtime community spans the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're stumbling through the dusty streets of ancient Persepolis, and the heat isn't just uncomfortable, it's weaponized. Your throat feels like you've been gargling sand, and then every breath burns your lungs. The locals seem impossibly calm, their flowing robes somehow crisp despite the infernal conditions. You notice they keep disappearing into buildings and emerging refreshed, like they've discovered some secret oasis hidden in plain sight. Following a merchant carrying dates, you duck through a doorway, and sweet mercy, the temperature drops 20 degrees instantly. No electricity humming, no mechanical whirring, just blessed coolness washing over your scorched skin. The secret lies in those strange towers you've been seeing everywhere, jutting up from rooftops like rectangular chimneys, having an identity crisis. The Persians call them badgers, which literally translates to wind catchers, though you're starting to think lifesavers would be more accurate. These architectural marvels stand anywhere from 15 to 60 feet tall, with openings facing the prevailing winds. But here's where it gets interesting, and where historians still argue about the exact mechanics. The towers don't just catch wind, they create it. You watch as an elderly craftsman explains the system to his apprentice, using hand gestures that transcend your language barrier. The tower's internal fins and vanes direct even the slightest breeze downward. But that's just the beginning. The real magic happens underground, where a labyrinth of clay pipes carries water from distant mountains. As the wind passes over these pipes, evaporation occurs, cooling the air further. Some scholars believe the Persians understood the principle of pressure differentials centuries before it was formally documented, using height variations to create natural convection currents. The mainstream historical fact that everyone agrees on is that these wind catchers were already common by 500 BCE, appearing in archaeological records from Egypt to Pakistan. But here's the quirky tidbit that makes you smile. Apparently, ancient Persian real estate listings specifically mentioned the number and orientation of badgers, kind of like how modern listings brag about central air. Imagine house hunting in 400 BCE. Charming mud brick home, 3 bedrooms, 2 goats included, excellent wind catcher, with mountain views. You climb the narrow stairs inside one of these wind catchers, your fingers trailing along walls that feel surprisingly cool despite the blazing sun outside. The structure sways slightly in the wind, not enough to be alarming, but just enough to remind you that you're essentially inside a giant clay chimney. At the top, you peer through the directional openings and finally understand why these towers look like they're wearing architectural crowns. Each opening faces a different direction, with internal baffles that can be adjusted seasonally. The morning winds from the mountains get one treatment, while the afternoon desert gusts get another entirely. The engineering precision makes your head spin. These aren't just passive air scoops, they're dynamic systems that ancient Persians fine tuned over generations. You watch as a maintenance worker, because yes, even in 400 BCE, someone had to clean the air ducts, demonstrates how wooden panels can redirect airflow. During sandstorms, they seal certain openings while keeping others functional. The mainstream historical fact here is that badger technology spread along trade routes that faster than gossip in a bathhouse, reaching as far as North Africa within a century. But here's what the textbooks don't tell you. Archaeological evidence suggests that different regions developed their own flavors of wind catchers, like ancient architectural franchises with local modifications. Standing inside the tower, you feel the air current pulling at your clothes, creating a natural vacuum that would make a Dyson engineer jealous. The Persians discovered that by incorporating water features at the base of these towers, fountains, pools, or those mysterious clay pipes, they could drop temperatures by up to 40 degrees. Historians still argue whether this was intentional engineering or a happy accident that became standard practice. What's not debatable is the social hierarchy of wind catchers. The taller your badger, the cooler your house, and the higher your status. It's like having a Ferrari in your garage, except it's a 60-foot clay tower in your roof. You descend back to ground level where the real magic happens. The wind doesn't just blow through and disappear, it's channeled through specific rooms in a precise order. The modulus, or main reception room, gets first dibs on the cool air, because heaven forbid your guests suffer while discussing poetry and politics. Then it flows to the family quarters, and finally to the storage areas where it helps preserve food. Some wealthy homes incorporated multiple wind catchers working in tandem, creating cross ventilation patterns that modern HVAC designers would recognize immediately. The quirky tidbit that makes you chuckle is that ancient Persian teenagers apparently figured out how to use wind catchers for communication, sending messages between houses by modulating the airflow. Think smoke signals, but with air pressure. Parents were not amused, especially when kids coordinated their escapes from Zoroastrian religious classes. You're examining the tower's base when you notice something odd. Channels carved into the floor leading to what looks like nowhere. Following them requires getting on your hands and knees. Dignity be damned, because you've caught the scent of something extraordinary, moisture in the desert. These channels connect to an underground network that would make modern municipal planners weep with envy. The craftsman you've been shadowing grins at your excitement, probably thinking, Another tourist discovers our obvious secret. He lights a small oil lamp and beckons you toward a heavy wooden door that's been keeping secrets for centuries. As it creaks open, cool air rushes out like an escaped spirit, carrying the smell of wet clay and something else, engineering genius. You follow the craftsman down stone steps worn smooth by countless feet, your oil lamp casting dancing shadows on walls that glisten with condensation. The temperature drops with each step, and you realize you're entering the secret cardiovascular system of ancient Persian architecture, the clay pipe network that turns brutal desert heat into bearable living conditions. These aren't just random tubes, they're precisely calculated arteries designed to maximize cooling through what modern scientists would call thermodynamics. But what ancient Persians simply called not dying of heat stroke. The tunnel opens into a chamber where clay pipes of various sizes converge like a subterranean octopus. Your guide runs his weathered hand along one pipe, and it's cold, actually cold, in the middle of the desert. The mainstream historical fact is that these pipes, called naboobs by locals, though scholars debate the etymology, were manufactured using a specific clay mixture that retained moisture while resisting erosion. Teams of specialized potters worked exclusively on these cooling systems, passing techniques through families like treasured recipes. But here's the fringe tidbit that makes you raise an eyebrow. Some archaeological sites show evidence of pipes containing traces of salt deposits, suggesting ancient Persians might have experimented with saline solutions to enhance evaporative cooling, basically inventing swamp coolers 2 millennia before anyone coined the term. You crawl through a maintenance tunnel, dignity officially abandoned, following the pipe network deeper underground. The craftsmanship is staggering, joints sealed with a mixture of egg whites and camel hair, curves calculated to prevent air bubbles, slopes angled to promote water flow without creating destructive pressure. Each pipe bears a maker's mark, like an ancient quality control stamps. Your guide points to various symbols, explaining through gestures that different marks indicate different workshops, different clay sources, even different installation seasons. Historians still argue whether these marks represent an early form of warranty system or just potter's pride. But either way, some of these pipes have been functioning for over 1,000 years. The genius becomes apparent when you reach a distribution chamber where dozens of pipes branch off in different directions. Water from mountain springs flows through the main channels, while air from the wind catchers passes over them in perpendicular tubes. The two never mix, but the proximity creates a heat exchange that would earn a standing ovation at an engineering conference. You notice that some pipes have adjustable clay dampers, ancient versions of HVAC zone controls. The wealthy could literally redirect cooling to specific rooms, leaving less favorable spaces for servants or that annoying relative who overstayed their welcome. Testing the system's effectiveness, you place your hand over different outlets and feel varying temperatures and airflow rates. It's not uniform, it's customized. The bedroom zones get gentle, cool breezes perfect for sleeping, while workspace areas receive stronger airflow to combat afternoon lethargy. Some pipes even show evidence of aromatic herbs placed in special chambers, making this possibly history's first air conditioning with built in air freshener. The quirky discovery that delights you is graffiti on some pipes. Apparently, ancient maintenance workers left notes for each other, including what appears to be a 1,400-year-old drawing of a supervisor with donkey ears. Your exploration reveals something unexpected: emergency overflow channels leading to underground cisterns. When the system produces excess condensation or experiences rare flooding, these channels prevent damage while storing water for dry seasons. It's a closed loop system that wastes nothing. Even the condensation from cooling gets recycled. The ancient Persians didn't just solve one problem, they solved five simultaneously, with style points for longevity. As you prepare to surface, your guide shows you one final secret: access points hidden throughout the city where residents could perform maintenance without excavating entire streets. These ancient utility corridors predate modern infrastructure planning by centuries, complete with what looks suspiciously like primitive manhole covers. You emerge from the clay pipe network only to find yourself at the entrance of something even more ambitious: a Qanat tunnel, one of thousands that spiderweb beneath the Persian plateau. If the wind catchers are the lungs of ancient air conditioning and the clay pipes its circulation, then Qanats are its lifeblood. You're handed a torch that sputters with sheep fat. Romantic, right? And invited to descend into a shaft that looks like it leads straight to the underworld. The latter is nothing more than notches carved into the wall, polished smooth by generations of workers who definitely didn't have OSHA compliance officers breathing down their necks. 20 feet down, your world transforms into a horizontal tunnel stretching into darkness. The ceiling drips steadily, not a structural problem, but evidence of the Qanat's primary function: transporting water from mountain aquifers to desert cities, sometimes across distances of 40 miles or more. The mainstream historical fact is that Qanat technology dates back to at least 800 BCE, with some systems still operational today. Persian engineers calculated slopes of 0.5 to 2% gradient, too steep, and erosion destroys the tunnel, too shallow, and water stagnates. But here's the archaeological oddity: some Qanats show evidence of deliberate comfort zones where workers carved out larger chambers, complete with what appear to be bench seats and even primitive artwork, suggesting these underground highways had rest stops. You're sloshing through ankle-deep water that's surprisingly cold, trying not to think about what else might be sharing this tunnel with you every 100 meters or so. Vertical shafts pierce upward to the surface, ventilation holes that also served as excavation points during construction. The engineering feat becomes mind-boggling when you realize workers dug these tunnels entirely by hand, navigating by oil lamp, maintaining precise gradients using only plumb lines and water levels. Historians still argue about mortality rates during construction, with estimates ranging from occasionally lethal to basically a death sentence. Yet communities considered Qanat builders heroes worthy of the best marriage prospects. The tunnel atmosphere is its own microclimate, humid but cool, with an air movement created by the temperature differential between the water and the desert above. You notice clay pipes branching off the main channel at intervals, tapping into the Qanat's cooling potential. These secondary systems feed into basements and underground chambers where ancient Persians stored everything from food to scholarly scrolls. Some wealthy estates had private Qanat access, essentially VIP subscriptions to the municipal cooling system. Your guide demonstrates how wooden gates control flow rates, a technology so effective that modern engineers studying these systems often conclude there's nothing to improve. Crawling through a particularly narrow section, goodbye, last shred of claustrophobia, you encounter something unexpected: fish, actual fish, living their entire lives in perpetual darkness, proof that these tunnels maintain consistent water quality and temperature year round. The quirky detail that makes you laugh is discovering that ancient Persian kids apparently treated qanats like we treated storm drains, as dangerous but irresistible playgrounds. Graffiti near access points includes what can only be described as the ancient equivalent of Darius was here, and crude drawings that suggest teenage humor hasn't evolved much in 2 millennia. The real revelation comes when you reach a distribution node where the Qanat feeds into an underground reservoir. The chamber is vast, carved from bedrock, with a vaulted ceiling that would make Gothic architects jealous. Water cascades down specially designed spillways that maximize aeration and cooling, creating what amounts to a subterranean waterfall. The acoustic properties are mesmerizing. Ancient Persians incorporated sound design into their cooling systems, because why just be comfortable when you can be comfortable with a soundtrack? Stone platforms around the reservoir show wear patterns suggesting this wasn't just infrastructure. It was a social space where people gathered to escape the heat, conduct business, maybe even hold the occasional underground poetry slam. You surface from the Qanat system gasping like a half-drowned mole rat, only to find yourself facing something that makes absolutely no sense: a massive dome in the middle of the desert, covered in what looks like frozen waterfalls of mud. Your brain short circuits trying to process what the locals call a yakchal, literally ice pit, because surely these ancient peoples aren't claiming they stored ice through summer in a climate that could fry eggs on rocks. Yet here it stands, a 60-foot tall cone of specially mixed clay, straw, sand, and egg whites, because apparently ancient Persians put egg whites in everything, like some kind of prehistoric superfood trend. The entrance tunnel slopes downward at an angle that would challenge a mountain goat, and the temperature plummets faster than your confidence in your sandals' traction. By the time you reach the storage chamber, you're shivering, actually shivering, in the middle of the Persian desert. The mainstream historical fact is that these ice houses could maintain temperatures below freezing even when outside temperatures exceeded 100 degrees, using principles of evaporative cooling, thermal mass, and insulation that wouldn't be formally understood by science for another 1,000 years. But here's the fringe detail that blows your mind. Analysis of ice core samples from ancient yakchals shows traces of saffron and rose water, suggesting Persians weren't just storing ice, they were making flavored varieties for the ultimate ancient snow cones. The interior walls are over 6 feet thick at the base, tapering as they rise to a ventilation hole at the apex that creates a convection current strong enough to ruffle your hair. You run your fingers along walls coated with a special mortar called sarouge, made from, wait for it, sand, clay, lime, goat hair, and egg whites mixed with ash from specific desert plants. This combination creates a material so water resistant and insulating that modern attempts to replicate it often fall short. Historians still argue whether the recipe variations between regions represent local innovations or closely guarded trade secrets, but everyone agrees these structures were engineering marvels that made ice a commodity even commoners could occasionally afford. Your guide produces an actual chunk of ice from a storage pit, grinning at your stunned expression. The ice was formed during winter nights using an ingenious system of shallow pools protected by shade walls. Persian engineers discovered that by creating long, narrow channels facing away from the wind, they could exploit radiative cooling and the desert's dramatic temperature swings. Water would freeze overnight, workers would collect it before dawn, and the Yakchal would store it for months. The quirky tidbit that makes you laugh is evidence that ancient Persian kids ran ice delivery services during summer, complete with what archaeologists interpret as primitive pricing lists carved into clay tablets. Apparently, ice cost more during heat waves, proving surge pricing isn't a modern invention. The storage system inside reveals multiple levels, each serving different purposes. The lowest level holds the densest, oldest ice, while upper levels store newer additions and what appears to be an ancient version of a refrigerated food court. Clay vessels embedded in the walls contain preserved fruits, meat, and even what might be the world's oldest ice cream, a mixture of grape syrup, rose water, and vermicelli that would make modern molecular gastronomists weep with envy. Some yakchals connected to Qanat systems, using the flowing water to enhance cooling and maintain humidity levels that prevented sublimation, because apparently ancient Persians understood ice loss through phase transition better than most modern physics students. You discover maintenance tunnels between the walls where workers could adjust ventilation baffles and clear ice buildups. The engineering precision is staggering, angles calculated to prevent direct sunlight from ever reaching the ice, drainage systems to handle meltwater, even acoustic dampening to prevent sound vibrations from destabilizing the storage. The whole structure hums with a low frequency resonance that your guide explains helps maintain structural integrity while discouraging pests. As you prepare to leave this frozen oasis, you notice inscriptions near the entrance, not prayers or royal proclamations, but what look like customer reviews from 2,000 years ago, rating the ice quality and complaining about prices. You're still processing the ice house miracle when a palace guard who looks like he bench presses camels for fun beckons you through an archway draped with silk curtains. Apparently, your reputation as that weird foreigner obsessed with air holes has reached royal ears, and you're being granted access to the Shah's private cooling systems, an honor usually reserved for trusted architects and extremely attractive courtesans. The palace sprawls like a small city, But instead of oppressive heat, you feel mysterious breezes that seem to come from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously, carrying hints of jasmine and something that might be ancient Febreze. The first revelation hits you in the reception hall, where massive columns aren't just holding up the roof, they're hollow, functioning as vertical air shafts connected to the underground Connaught network. Water trickles down internal channels carved into the marble, creating a cooling effect that makes the columns pleasant to lean against, which explains why palace guests seem to spend a lot of time hugging architecture. The mainstream historical fact is that Persian palaces incorporated cooling into every architectural element, from decorative screens that filtered and directed air to reflective pools positioned to create microclimates. But here's the quirky discovery: hidden panels in the walls that can redirect airflow to specific throne positions, essentially giving the Shah his own personal air conditioning remote control carved in stone. Your unauthorized tour guide, who's definitely getting fired if caught, shows you the women's quarters, where cooling reaches artistic heights. Intricate lattice work called mashrabiyah covers every window, designed to let air in while maintaining privacy and breaking up harsh sunlight into beautiful patterns. These aren't just functional, they're calculated to create specific air pressure differentials between rooms, pulling cool air from underground chambers while exhausting hot air through clerestory windows. Historians still argue whether the complex geometry was based on mathematical principles or trial and error, but the results speak for themselves. Rooms that stay comfortable even during the brutal afternoon heat. The royal bedroom reveals the innovations that make you wonder if ancient Persians invented luxury before they invented the wheel. The bed sits over a shallow channel where cool water flows continuously, separated by a thin marble slab that conducts cold without dampness. Silk curtains hang from tracks that allow them to be positioned to channel breezes directly over sleeping royalty, while hidden ducts in the walls can be opened or closed to adjust airflow intensity. Some archaeological evidence suggests certain palaces experimented with scented cooling, placing aromatic herbs in the air channels to create different moods in different rooms: lavender for bedrooms, mint for studies, and something suspiciously cannabis like for the recreation areas. The throne room showcases the ultimate power play, a cooling system so effective it became a political tool. Visiting dignitaries would swelter in anterooms while waiting for audiences, then experience shocking relief upon entering the Shah's presence, a psychological manipulation through temperature control. The throne itself sits atop a platform with internal air channels, ensuring the ruler never breaks a sweat while lesser mortals melt. The quirky detail you stumble upon is what appears to be an ancient complaint box hidden behind a tapestry, containing tablets griping about everything from uneven cooling to guards hogging the best ventilation spots. You discover the palace's secret weapon in the basement, a massive cistern connected to multiple qanats, creating a reservoir of cold water that feeds the entire cooling system. But it's not just storage, it's active cooling. Paddle wheels powered by underground streams keep the water circulating, while specially designed baffles create whirlpools that maximize evaporative cooling. The ceiling of this underground lake is carved with inverted domes that trap and concentrate cool air, which then feeds into a network of channels reaching every corner of the palace. Workers access the system through hidden passages, maintaining the illusion that the palace magically stays cool through divine favor rather than engineering genius and regular maintenance. You escape the palace before someone realizes you definitely shouldn't have seen the Shah's secret cooling diary. Yes, apparently he kept notes on optimal sleeping temperatures, and stumble into what sounds like organized chaos, a construction site where master builders are creating a new badger. The morning air already shimmers with heat, but these craftsmen have been at work since before dawn, racing to complete structural elements before the clay becomes too dry to work properly. You watch, mesmerized, as an elderly master builder argues with his apprentices about the precise angle of an internal baffle, using hand gestures that suggest either complex aerodynamics or very specific profanity. The construction process reveals why these cooling systems lasted millennia while your apartment's AC unit breaks every summer. Everything starts with the foundation, not just any foundation, but a carefully engineered base that extends deep enough to tap into the Earth's stable temperature while incorporating channels for future connections. The mainstream historical fact is that Persian builders developed a modular construction system, creating standardized components that could be assembled in different configurations depending on the site's wind patterns and the client's budget. But here's the weird archaeological evidence. Some construction sites show remains of what appear to be wind testing rigs, basically ancient wind tunnels made from cloth and wooden frames used to optimize tower placement before committing to expensive clay construction. You're handed a primitive hard hat, basically a turban with extra padding, and invited to climb the scaffolding, which is an adventure in please don't let me die engineering. The workers are laying courses of sun-dried bricks, each one specifically shaped to create the badger's internal airflow channels. Between courses, they spread that magical sarouge mortar, mixed on site according to proportions that the master builder guards like nuclear launch codes. The morning's comedy comes when an apprentice accidentally mixes in too much goat hair, creating a batch that looks like the building is growing a beard. Everyone laughs, but the mistake costs precious time and materials. These systems require precision, not just in design, but in execution. The real genius becomes apparent when you watch them install the internal fins. These aren't just slapped in randomly. Each one is positioned using a plumb line and what appears to be an ancient protractor made from bronze. The angles must be perfect to create the pressure differentials that drive airflow, and the master builder checks each one personally, sometimes making adjustments so minor you can't even see the difference. Historians still argue about whether ancient Persians understood Bernoulli's principle mathematically or just intuitively, but watching these craftsmen work, you realize it doesn't matter. They understand airflow the way a musician understands rhythm, through experience and feel rather than equations. The construction site has its own cooling system, because of course it does. Temporary wind catchers made from cloth and wooden frames provide relief for workers, while clay pipes deliver water from a nearby qanat for both construction needs and impromptu shower breaks. You notice workers taking turns standing over specific spots where underground channels create updrafts. Apparently, everyone knows the best cooling spots, and there's an unspoken rotation system. The quirky discovery is construction graffiti on spare bricks, drawings of completed buildings with exaggerated wind catchers, caricatures of demanding clients, and what appears to be an ancient meme about architects who promise impossible cooling performance. As the day progresses and temperatures soar, you witness the construction schedule adapt to the heat. Heavy work stops during peak hours, replaced by detail work in shaded areas. The master builder demonstrates how they test airflow during construction using smoke from burning herbs, adjusting internal structures in real time based on the smoke patterns. Some adjustments require tearing down and rebuilding entire sections, perfectionism that explains why these structures still function after centuries. The workers break for lunch in an underground chamber connected to the construction site because apparently even ancient construction companies understood that comfortable workers are productive workers. You leave as they're installing the decorative elements that will crown the badger, each one functional as well as beautiful, directing wind while announcing the owner's wealth and taste to anyone who glances skyward. You're following rumors of a secret swimming hole when the ground suddenly gives way, not catastrophically, just enough to send you sliding down a hidden entrance into what might be the ancient world's best kept secret. You splash into waist deep water that's so cold your body can't decide whether to gasp or sing hallelujah. Oil lamps flickering in wall niches reveal you've tumbled into an abbey anbar, an underground water reservoir that doubles as the Persian Empire's most exclusive cooling club. The chamber stretches out like a subterranean cathedral with vaulted ceilings that create perfect acoustics for your embarrassed splashing. The mainstream historical fact about anbars is that they served as community water storage, engineered to keep water clean and cool year round. But you're quickly discovering they were so much more: social centers where the normal rules of Persian society got as fluid as the water itself. Stone platforms ring the reservoir at different levels, worn smooth by centuries of visitors who came for refreshment and stayed for the gossip. The water comes from multiple qanats, entering through filtered channels that remove sediment while adding minerals that give the water a slight effervescence. Ancient Persia, apparently, had sparkling water before it was cool. You notice the ceiling isn't just architecturally impressive, it's functionally brilliant. Multiple domes create air pockets that trap and cool air through convection, while the shape amplifies and directs sound in specific patterns. Whisper in one corner, and someone 50 feet away hears you perfectly, but people 10 feet away hear nothing. Historians still argue whether this was intentional acoustic engineering or a happy accident, but locals definitely exploited it for private conversations in public spaces. The quirky detail making you grin is carved stone furniture around the edges, what can only be described as ancient lounge chairs, complete with armrests and drainage channels for wet bodies. The water circulation system reveals another layer of genius. Instead of stagnant storage, the reservoir maintains constant flow through intake and outlet channels positioned to create a slow but steady current. This prevents algae growth while maintaining consistent temperature throughout the massive space. Some channels feed decorative fountains that aerate the water, while others connect to smaller chambers that appear to be ancient VIP sections, private pools for those who could afford exclusive access. You find evidence of what might be history's first pool rules carved into the walls, including what seems to be a no running while pictogram and something that definitely means no peeing in the pool. The swimming to the far end, because when in ancient Persia, right, you discover an entire network of connected chambers, each serving different purposes. One contains what appears to be a cold plunge pool, fed by the deepest, coldest Qanat water. Another houses warming rooms where bathers could adjust between temperature extremes, basically inventing the spa experience 2 millennia before anyone thought to charge $500 for it. Clay pipes in the walls carry air from the water chambers to adjacent buildings, providing cooling that smells faintly of minerals and moisture. Some archaeological evidence suggests certain Abe Anbars incorporated medicinal minerals into their water systems, creating therapeutic pools for treating various ailments. Though historians debate whether the health benefits were real or placebo, the social dynamics become clear when you notice worn patterns suggesting regular gathering spots. Musicians performed from acoustic sweet spots, merchants conducted deals while cooling their feet, and young people definitely used the darkness for activities their parents wouldn't approve of. Some things never change. Graffiti in various scripts tells stories of love, trade disputes, and what appears to be ancient Yelp reviews of different Abbey Anbars around the city. Your favorite discovery is what can only be described as an ancient swimming instructor's teaching notes, carved diagrams showing different swimming strokes with commentary that roughly translates to kick harder, you're not a dead fish. As you reluctantly prepare to leave, you realize these weren't just functional spaces. They were the ancient equivalent of community centers, where water, cooling, and social life merged in the darkness below the desert. You emerge from the underground water world looking like a drowned cat, but a refreshed drowned cat, just in time to join a caravan heading east along the Silk Road. The journey promises to be brutal, 5 days across open desert where the sun treats travelers like ants under a magnifying glass. But your fellow merchants just smile knowingly. Speaking of oasis stops with the reverence usually reserved for religious sites. As your camel lurches into motion, why do they always seem personally offended by passengers? You notice the route isn't random. It follows ancient markers pointing to something more valuable than gold. Cooling stations. By noon, when the heat makes breathing feel like inhaling fire, you spot the first caravanserai rising from the desert like a clay mirage. These fortified rest stops dot the trade routes every 20 to 30 miles, a day's journey apart, and each one is an engineering marvel designed to turn the desert's murder heat into manageable discomfort. The mainstream historical fact is that caravanserais provided secure lodging for merchants and their goods, But the cooling innovations built into these structures rival anything in the cities. As you stumble through the gates, the temperature drop is so dramatic, your sweat instantly turns to goosebumps. The central courtyard showcases Persian cooling at its most practical. A large pool occupies the center, fed by underground channels and surrounded by covered arcades that create layered shade. But here's where it gets clever. The entire complex is oriented to capture prevailing winds and funnel them through the structure. Wind catchers at strategic corners don't just cool, they create air currents that help dry, sweaty travelers and their cargo simultaneously. Historians still argue whether the standardized design across thousands of miles represents central planning or convergent evolution, but either way, these buildings saved countless lives and probably prevented several wars started by heat-induced irritability. Your assigned chamber reveals the innovations born from necessity. The walls are double layered with an air gap between them, creating insulation that works both ways, keeping heat out during the day and warmth in during the freezing desert nights. Small windows near the ceiling can be opened to release hot air, while floor level vents draw in cool air from underground chambers. The bed platform is raised and slatted, allowing air circulation underneath, and niches in the walls hold water jars that sweat through porous clay, cooling their contents through evaporation. The quirky detail that amuses you is ancient traveler graffiti rating different caravanserais. Apparently, Jamshid's Rest had great cooling but terrible food, while Desert Rose Inn was worth the extra day's journey for the pool alone. The real magic happens at sunset when the caravanserai transforms from survival shelter to social hub. The cooling systems work overtime as hundreds of travelers crowd the common areas, but somehow the temperature remains comfortable. You discover why when a maintenance worker shows you the underground level. A massive cistern stores water from winter rains, while channels direct cool air from this reservoir throughout the building. Some caravanserais even incorporated primitive swamp coolers, water soaked reed mats positioned where wind would pass through them. The evaporative cooling is so effective that some chambers actually become too cold at night, explaining the piles of wool blankets that seemed excessive when you arrived in the heat. The kitchen area reveals another cooling innovation. Cooking happens in semi underground chambers with chimney systems that draw heat up and out while pulling cool air in at floor level. This keeps the cooking area tolerable while preventing the rest of the complex from turning into an oven. Clay storage vessels embedded in the walls keep perishables cool, while a special chamber maintains just the right temperature for fermenting mare's milk into kumis, because apparently even ancient travelers needed their probiotics. As you settle in for the night, listening to merchants exchange stories in a dozen languages while cool air whispers through the chambers, you realize these weren't just rest stops, they were life support systems that made civilization possible in impossible places. You're jolted awake by what sounds like thunder but turns out to be much worse: a collapsing wind catcher at the neighboring compound, racing outside with other gawkers. You witness a scene of ancient engineering disaster that makes modern construction fails look tame. The massive badger has folded in on itself like a house of cards, sending clouds of clay dust billowing through the pre dawn air. The owner stands in his nightshirt, alternating between cursing the builders and calculating how many camels this disaster just cost him. This isn't uncommon. For every successful cooling system that lasted centuries, dozens failed spectacularly, taking fortunes and sometimes lives with them. The mainstream historical fact about these failures is that ancient Persian engineers learned through catastrophic trial and error, developing building codes that were literally written in the blood and bankruptcy of previous attempts. But as you help dig through the rubble, because rubbernecking comes with obligations in ancient communities, you discover the quirky truth. This particular collapse was caused by someone's brilliant idea to improve the traditional design by making the wind catcher taller and thinner to catch more breeze. The foundation, sized for a standard tower, couldn't handle the increased leverage. You find the modification plans scratched on a clay tablet, complete with what appears to be ancient peer review comments warning against this exact outcome, ignored naturally. The morning turns into an impromptu engineering symposium as builders from across the district arrive to analyze the failure. Arguments break out about everything from clay mixture ratios to whether the collapse was caused by design flaws or that suspicious earthquake last month that might have just been everyone's imagination. You're fascinated by the forensic approach. They're not just cleaning up, they're learning. Pieces of the structure are examined like crime scene evidence, with experts pointing out stress fractures, improper mortar application, and what appears to be corners cut during construction to save money. Historians still argue about how many people died learning to build these systems, but the evidence suggests the number was significant enough to inspire the first building inspection protocols. Things get more exciting when someone discovers the collapsed tower has ruptured an underground water channel, turning the courtyard into an impromptu lake. The Connaught system, so brilliant when working properly, becomes a flooding nightmare when damaged. You watch teams of workers scrambling to redirect water flow using emergency gates. Apparently, ancient engineers planned for failures too, but some property owners aren't so lucky. You hear about a merchant whose entire underground storage area flooded when his private Connaught connection failed, turning his silk warehouse into very expensive papier-mâché. The cleanup reveals another engineering truth. These systems required constant maintenance, and skipping even one inspection could lead to catastrophe. The day's tour of disasters continues at an abandoned yachtchal on the city's outskirts, its massive dome cracked open like an egg. Local kids use it as a playground now, but the elderly guide explains it once stored ice for half the district until a particularly hot summer caused rapid expansion and contraction that shattered the carefully calculated structure. Inside, you can see where the thermal stress caused the special mortar to fail, creating cracks that led to total collapse. The quirky detail is graffiti from the original builders warning about this exact scenario. Apparently, they knew the design was pushing material limits, but built it anyway because the patron insisted on the largest ice house in the region. Some archaeological sites show evidence of multiple rebuilds, suggesting certain locations were cursed with repeated failures that ancient engineers couldn't quite solve. The afternoon brings news of a more dramatic failure. A wealthy estate's entire cooling system has failed catastrophically, with water channels backing up and flooding the main residence. You arrive to find a scene of soggy chaos, precious carpets being dragged into sunlight, servants bailing water with everything from cooking pots to helmets, and the owner having what can only be described as a biblical level meltdown. The investigation reveals the cause: tree roots infiltrating the clay pipes, a slow invasion that went unnoticed until the entire system clogged. Workers are already discussing solutions, including pipe designs with better root resistance and regular inspection protocols that might have prevented this expensive disaster. As you leave, stepping carefully around puddles of formerly precious possessions, you realize these ancient cooling systems were only as good as their weakest component, and Murphy's Law apparently existed long before Murphy. You're seeking spiritual enlightenment, or at least a break from disaster tourism, when you enter a Zoroastrian fire temple that immediately makes you forget about the blazing noon sun outside. The sacred flame flickers in its altar, maintaining the same fire that legend says has burned continuously for over 1,000 years. But what catches your attention isn't the religious symbolism, it's the fact that you're not sweating, despite standing next to an eternal flame in the middle of the desert. The priests smile at your confusion with the patient expression of people who've explained this paradox to countless confused visitors. The temple's cooling system represents the convergence of sacred architecture and practical engineering. The mainstream historical fact is that Zoroastrian temples required constant airflow to keep their sacred fires burning without smoking out the priests or cooking the worshippers. But the solution they developed transcended mere ventilation. It became an art form. The fire altar sits beneath a specially designed dome with channels that draw air from underground passages, creating a chimney effect that pulls hot air up and out while drawing cool air across the congregation. Historians still argue whether the acoustic properties that make prayers resonate perfectly were intentional or a happy accident of the airflow design. You follow a young priest through passages that reveal the hidden mechanics of divine comfort. The temple's foundation extends deep into the earth, where a network of chambers maintains year-round cool temperatures. Air entering these chambers passes over water channels fed by sacred springs, picking up moisture and dropping temperature before rising through carefully calculated shafts. The really clever bit? The fire itself drives the entire system. Hot air rising from the flame creates negative pressure that pulls cool air through the underground network, meaning the very thing that should make the temple unbearable actually powers its cooling system. Some archaeological evidence suggests certain temples incorporated musical elements into their air channels, creating haunting harmonics during strong winds that enhanced the mystical atmosphere. The inner sanctum showcases innovations that blend the practical with the profound. Polished metal plates on the walls aren't just decorative, they're positioned to reflect heat away from congregants while directing it toward ventilation shafts. The floor features channels filled with running water, hidden beneath perforated stone that allows cool air to rise without letting clumsy worshippers fall in. The quirky discovery that makes you chuckle is evidence of ancient climate control wars. Competing temples apparently tried to outcool each other, leading to increasingly elaborate systems. One ruin shows evidence of what can only be described as a failed attempt at underground refrigeration using imported mountain snow, ambition that exceeded both physics and budget. The priests demonstrate how they adjust the airflow for different ceremonies. During summer solstice celebrations, when crowds pack the temple, they open additional vents and redirect water flow to maximize cooling. For intimate winter ceremonies, they can partially close channels to retain heat while maintaining enough airflow for the flame. It's essentially a manual HVAC system operated by people who understand air currents the way sailors understand wind. You notice younger priests learning these adjustments through years of apprenticeship, as there's no manual, just generations of accumulated knowledge about how temperature, humidity, and crowd size interact in the sacred space. Your exploration reveals the temple's influence on secular architecture. Wealthy Zoroastrians incorporated similar principles into their homes, creating prayer rooms with miniature versions of the temple's cooling system. Some houses even maintained small sacred flames that served double duty as religious symbols and air circulation drivers. The really fascinating part is how different religions adapted these ideas when Islam arrived in Persia. Mosques incorporated similar cooling principles while removing the fire elements, proving good engineering transcends theological differences. As you leave the temple, finally understanding how fire and ice can coexist in the desert, you're struck by how ancient Persians turned religious obligation into environmental innovation, creating spaces where both body and soul could find relief from earthly discomforts. You're trudging behind a nomadic clan as they move their flocks to summer pastures, wondering why you thought following people who live in tents through the desert would reveal cooling secrets. Then the matriarch, a weathered woman who looks like she could stare down the sun and win, starts unpacking what appears to be the ancient equivalent of portable air conditioning. These aren't the massive architectural marvels you've been exploring. They're clever, mobile solutions that prove ancient Persians could innovate with limited resources and maximum ingenuity. The first revelation comes in the form of special water vessels called zir pots, a large clay pot containing a smaller pot, with the space between filled with sand that's kept constantly damp. As water evaporates from the sand through the outer pot's porous surface, it cools the inner chamber by up to 20 degrees. The mainstream historical fact is that these devices could keep water, food, and even medicines cool for days, but watching the nomads use them reveals layers of sophistication. Different clans developed their own pottery techniques, some adding crushed shells to increase porosity, others using specific clay types that enhanced evaporation rates. The quirky detail that amazes you is personalized zir pots with family symbols and what appear to be performance ratings, basically ancient product reviews fired directly into the clay. The nomads' tents themselves are engineering marvels disguised as simple shelters. The black goat hair fabric absorbs heat during the day, creating an updraft that draws air through the tent, while the loose weave allows breezes to penetrate. But here's the clever bit. They position windscreens made of woven reeds at strategic angles around the tent, creating wind channels that funnel breezes through the living space while blocking sandstorms. At night, they reconfigure these screens to trap the day's warmth, showing an understanding of thermal dynamics that would impress modern camping enthusiasts. Historians still argue about whether this knowledge spread from nomads to city dwellers or vice versa, but watching these people work, you suspect they've been doing this since before cities existed. The real magic happens when they set up camp near a wadi. Within hours, they've created a micro oasis using techniques that seem impossibly simple yet brilliantly effective. They dig shallow pits lined with specially treated leather that doesn't leak but allows minimal evaporation, creating cooling pools. Reed mats soaked in water hang from wooden frames, positioned where afternoon winds will pass through them. Portable swamp coolers that can drop local temperature by 15 degrees. Some families carry small wind catchers made of cloth and collapsible wooden frames, miniature versions of the massive badgers that can be assembled in minutes and adjusted for wind direction. The women demonstrate cooling techniques that border on alchemy. They wear multiple layers of loose clothing, counterintuitive until you realize the layers trap cool air while the outer fabric reflects heat. Special head coverings incorporate small clay beads that are soaked in water each morning, providing personal evaporative cooling throughout the day. They even show you how to position yourself while sleeping, slightly elevated on a woven platform that allows air circulation, with water-filled gourds positioned to catch and concentrate night breezes. The amusing discovery is that teenagers in the clan have developed their own innovations, including what amounts to an ancient cooling vest made of cloth pockets filled with wet sand, fashion meeting function in the desert. As evening approaches, you witness the culmination of nomadic cooling wisdom. The entire camp reconfigures based on predictable wind patterns, with cooking fires positioned to draw hot air away from living spaces while pulling cool evening air through the camp. They've even developed a system of underground storage that takes advantage of the temperature differential between day and night, burying wrapped items in sand during the day and exposing them to cold night air. The elderly clan members share stories of cooling discoveries and disasters, including one spectacular failure involving an attempt to create portable ice using a combination of saltpeter and camel urine, an experiment that apparently ended badly for everyone within smelling distance. As you settle in for the night, surprisingly comfortable despite being in a tent in the desert, you realize these nomads have distilled centuries of cooling knowledge into practices so elegant they seem effortless. You receive an invitation that sounds too ridiculous to be real, a pool party at a Persian noble's estate, where the entertainment includes water performances and cooled air exhibitions. Arriving at the palace gardens, you discover this isn't hyperbole, but an understatement. The Persians have turned cooling systems into recreational art, creating pleasure gardens where water and air conditioning merge into something that would make modern Vegas jealous. Everywhere you look, fountains shoot streams of water in intricate patterns, while guests lounge in shaded pavilions where the air is so perfectly cooled you'd swear there were hidden ice blocks if you didn't know better. The garden's centerpiece is a massive pool shaped like a four-pointed star, with each arm extending toward a different pavilion. But this isn't just decorative. The shape creates specific water currents that maintain circulation while the depth varies to accommodate different activities. The mainstream historical fact is that Persian gardens, called paradida, from which we get paradise, were designed as earthly representations of heaven, complete with sophisticated hydraulic engineering. But experiencing it firsthand reveals layers of genius. The pool's dark blue tiles aren't just aesthetic, they absorb heat during the day and release it at night, moderating temperature swings. Underwater channels connect to the main Qanat system, ensuring constant fresh water flow while maintaining perfect temperature. The real party starts when musicians position themselves in acoustic sweet spots where the sound carries across the water, amplified and cooled by the garden's design. Dancers perform on platforms that seem to float on the pool's surface, but are actually supported by submerged columns with water flowing through them, ancient hydraulic stages that stay cool despite energetic performances. You're handed a drink in a porous clay cup that sweats in your hand, keeping the contents chilled, while servants circulate with fans made from bamboo and silk that have been stored in underground cooling chambers. The quirky detail that makes everyone laugh is a fountain designed to spray unsuspecting guests who step on certain tiles. Apparently, practical jokes are timeless, and Persian nobles love their cooling system pranks. The pavilions around the pool showcase different cooling philosophies. One uses cascading water walls, where thin sheets of water flow over carved marble, creating a curtain of coolness that guests can walk through without getting soaked. Another features what can only be called an ancient misting system. Clay pipes with tiny holes spray fine water droplets into the air, creating a cool microclimate. The engineering precision is staggering. Each pavilion maintains different temperature zones for different activities. The dining area stays moderately cool to keep food fresh without making guests shiver, while the relaxation zone drops temperatures low enough that people actually use wool blankets in the middle of summer. You discover the garden's secret weapon when led to an underground grotto accessed by stairs hidden behind a waterfall. This subterranean party space takes advantage of natural cave temperatures, enhanced by channels of running water carved into the walls. The ceiling has holes precisely positioned to create light effects as the sun moves, while maintaining airflow that keeps the space fresh despite being packed with revelers. Historians still argue whether these grottos were originally religious meditation spaces, repurposed for parties, or always designed for entertainment. But the acoustic properties that make conversations possible without shouting suggest intentional party planning. The amusing discovery is ancient graffiti suggesting these underground spaces hosted some wild parties, including what appears to be a complaint about noise from neighbors dated 450 BCE. As night falls, The garden transforms again. Torches are lit in positions that don't interfere with the cooling air currents, while the pool becomes a mirror reflecting stars and flames. The water features adjust. Some fountains shut off to reduce noise, while others increase flow to enhance nighttime cooling. Guests float on inflated animal skins in the pool, while musicians play from barges designed with built in cooling systems for their instruments, because apparently lutes warp in the heat too. The party culminates with a demonstration of synchronized fountains that dance to music, controlled by hidden workers operating valves in underground chambers. As you stagger home, slightly waterlogged but thoroughly cooled, you realize the Persians didn't just solve air conditioning, they made it entertainment, turning environmental engineering into social art. You're crouched in a modern archaeological excavation pit, your knees complaining about the position while your mind reels from what's emerging from the sand. The joint Iranian American team has been carefully uncovering what they believe is a 20,500-year-old cooling complex, and every layer reveals new surprises. The lead archaeologist, Dr. Yazdani, brushes dust from what appears to be a clay pipe junction with the reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. This changes everything, she mutters, pointing to tool marks that suggest mass production techniques nobody thought existed in ancient Persia. You're witnessing the moment modern science rediscovers what ancient engineers took for granted. The excavation reveals a complete neighborhood cooling system, interconnected in ways that make modern urban planning look primitive. Ground penetrating radar shows a vast network of tunnels extending far beyond the dig site, connecting homes, public buildings, and water sources in a grid that clearly followed a master plan. The mainstream historical fact is that recent archaeological discoveries have forced historians to revise their estimates of ancient Persian engineering capabilities upward by centuries. But what you're seeing goes beyond revision, it's revelation. Clay tablets found in what appears to be an ancient permit office contain building codes specifying minimum pipe diameters, required wind catcher heights, and even noise regulations for construction near residential areas. The morning's excitement peaks when workers uncover an intact workshop with tools still arranged on benches. These aren't crude implements, but specialized instruments for creating precise angles in clay pipes, measuring airflow, and even what looks like an ancient hygrometer for measuring humidity. Yazdani demonstrates how one tool works, creating perfect spirals inside pipes to induce air rotation, a technique modern HVAC engineers call turbulation that wasn't supposed to exist until the Industrial Revolution. The quirky find that has everyone buzzing is a set of clay models showing different wind catcher designs with what appear to be performance ratings scratched underneath, essentially ancient engineering prototypes with test results. The real breakthrough comes from the materials lab, where researchers analyze mortar samples using techniques that would seem like magic to the ancient builders. Mass spectrometry reveals the exact composition of the legendary Saruj mortar, including trace elements that explain its incredible durability. Some samples contain antibacterial compounds from specific plants, suggesting ancient Persians understood the connection between cooling systems and disease prevention. One researcher discovers that certain clay pipes contain microscopic channels that would have filtered water, not just cooling it, but purifying it. Historians still argue about whether this was intentional or accidental, but the consistency across samples suggests deliberate engineering. You join the team in a recreated test chamber where they're attempting to replicate ancient cooling techniques using period appropriate materials. The results are humbling, even with modern instruments to measure performance. Achieving the efficiency of ancient systems proves challenging. The breakthrough moment comes when an Iranian student suggests they've been thinking about it wrong. Instead of forcing air through the system, they need to let the system create its own flow. Once reconfigured to match ancient principles, the temperature drops dramatically. The amusing revelation is that several improvements modern engineers suggested actually make the system less efficient. Ancient Persians had already optimized their designs through centuries of trial and error. The excavation's final surprise is a chamber containing what amounts to an ancient engineering library. Clay tablets covered in diagrams show airflow patterns, heat transfer calculations using geometric representations, and what can only be maintenance schedules for citywide cooling systems. Some tablets appear to be student work, complete with corrections in different handwriting, evidence of formal engineering education 2,500 years ago. The most intriguing find is a tablet that seems to describe a cooling system failure analysis, documenting what went wrong and how to prevent it. Ancient Persians were doing post mortem engineering reviews. As the day ends and the team carefully covers the site, you're struck by how this discovery will rewrite textbooks, forcing us to acknowledge that sustainable cooling technology isn't modern innovation, but ancient wisdom waiting to be rediscovered. You're standing on the observation deck of Dubai's newest architectural marvel, a building that looks like it belongs in a sci fi movie, but draws its inspiration from technology older than Christianity. The architect, a young Emirati woman named Fatima, gestures excitedly at the massive wind towers integrated into the structure's design. My great grandmother would laugh, she says, seeing us rediscover what her grandmother's grandmother knew instinctively. The building uses no conventional air conditioning for 9 months of the year, yet maintains comfortable temperatures using principles perfected in ancient Persia, proving that sometimes the future looks remarkably like the past. The modern Badgers aren't exact replicas, they're evolved versions using contemporary materials but ancient principles. Instead of clay and mud brick, these towers use specialized concrete that mimics the thermal properties of traditional materials while lasting longer in harsh conditions. Solar panels crown each tower, but not for air conditioning. They power subtle fans that enhance natural convection only when necessary. The mainstream historical fact driving this architectural revolution is simple. Buildings using passive cooling consume 75% less energy than their mechanically cooled counterparts. But the real revelation comes from understanding how ancient wisdom applies to modern challenges. Computer modeling shows that Persian engineers had intuitively optimized designs that today's supercomputers can barely improve upon. Walking through the building reveals layer upon layer of ancient innovations adapted for contemporary life. The basement connects to a modern Qanat system, not hand dug tunnels, but precisely engineered pipes that tap into underground water tables and geothermal cooling. Water features throughout the building aren't just aesthetic, they're functional cooling elements positioned according to 20,500-year-old principles. The quirky modern twist is an app that lets occupants adjust their personal cooling zones by opening and closing vents, essentially gamifying what ancient Persians did manually. Some residents have become so adept at reading air currents that they've formed a club dedicated to optimizing building performance through crowdsourced vent management. The building's social spaces showcase how ancient cooling creates modern community. The central courtyard, modeled after Persian gardens, hosts everything from yoga classes to tech startup presentations, all comfortably cooled without a single mechanical unit. Restaurants use underground chambers based on Yakchal designs to store ingredients, while a rooftop pool system inspired by ancient Persian water features provides both recreation and cooling for the floors below. Historians still argue about whether ancient Persians would recognize these adaptations as evolution or corruption of their designs, but the results speak for themselves: lower energy bills, healthier air quality, and residents who actually know their neighbors because they gather in thoughtfully cooled common spaces. Your tour ends in Fatima's office, where she shows you plans for entire neighborhoods based on ancient Persian cooling principles. Streets oriented to channel winds, buildings that share cooling resources, public spaces designed around water and shade rather than concrete and glass. The ancient Persians solved problems we're just beginning to understand, she explains, pulling up thermal imaging that shows how traditional neighborhoods in Iran still outperform modern developments in comfort and efficiency. The amusing part is how developers initially resisted these ideas as backward until energy costs made them believers. Nothing motivates innovation like a brutal electricity bill. The day's final revelation comes from an unexpected source. Children playing in the building's courtyard have discovered how to use the air currents for games. Floating paper airplanes in patterns that would require physics degrees to calculate, but which they understand intuitively. It's the same intuitive understanding ancient Persian children must have developed, growing up in spaces where air and water were partners in comfort rather than resources to be consumed. As you leave, passing through temperature zones that shift as naturally as shadows, you realize the greatest innovation might be recognizing that innovation itself isn't always about inventing something new. Sometimes it's about remembering what we forgot. The desert sun sets behind buildings crowned with wind catchers, their silhouettes echoing across millennia. In conference rooms around the world, architects and engineers pore over archaeological reports, mining ancient wisdom for modern solutions. The Persians' greatest gift to us wasn't just the technology, it was the proof that human ingenuity can create comfort without destroying the world, that we can work with nature rather than against it. Their clay pipes and wind towers whisper across centuries, Sustainability isn't a modern concept, but an ancient practice, waiting patiently for us to remember. The story of Persian air conditioning fades gently, like cool air dispersing into warm night. You've traveled through time and temperature, from scorching ancient streets to climate controlled modern marvels, discovering that the thread connecting them isn't technology, but human cleverness applied to eternal problems. The badgers still catch wind, the Connaughts still carry water, and somewhere in the desert, an ancient cooling system still functions, indifferent to the empires that have risen and fallen around it. Your journey through Persian innovation draws to a close, but the lessons linger like the coolness in an underground chamber. These ancient engineers left us more than ruins. They left blueprints for living sustainably in impossible places, for finding comfort without compromise, for building civilizations that enhance rather than exhaust their environments. As modern cities grapple with rising temperatures and failing power grids, the answers might not lie in more powerful machines, but in more thoughtful design, not in fighting nature, but in dancing with it, the way Persians danced with the desert wind thousands of years ago. Tomorrow's solutions echo in yesterday's innovations. In a world growing warmer, the coolest technology might be the oldest. The Persians knew something we're only beginning to rediscover. True progress sometimes means looking backwards to move forward, finding an ancient clay, and careful observation the keys to future survival. Their gift to us isn't just air conditioning, it's the knowledge that human creativity, applied thoughtfully, can make any environment livable. Sweet dreams, and may your sleep be cooled by wisdom, both ancient and eternal.